the clicking sound of heels behind her. Inoshka Vladimirovna. The secretary caught up with her in the corridor. She had to turn around. "You've got a registered letter," the girl said, shoving it into her hands before running off again. The envelope was large, stamped. The last time she'd gotten one like this, it was from the bank about loans. Ina frowned involuntarily, a vague anxiety prickling her. She opened it once she was back at her desk and stared at the documents for several minutes. An inheritance. A house. 48 acres of land, split evenly between her and her sister. Ina ran her fingers over her eyes, rubbed the bridge of her nose, and started reading again. She barely remembered Grandma Anfisa, maybe had seen her a few times as a child. And now she'd left her half a house. Her first instinct was to shove the papers away. Ina had long since moved to the capital from her backwater hometown. She only spoke to her parents twice a year, and even then, only by phone. With her sister, they drifted apart completely, and this sudden inheritance felt like being dragged back into the past. Ina put everything back in the envelope and pushed it aside. She sat for a while, elbows on the table, hands folded, and then requested 3 days off without pay. That very day, she set out. When she arrived, she wasn't the first. Her sister Zenaida was already there with her husband, of course, and a notary. Once the notary confirmed that all heirs were present, he quickly handed them the keys, jumped into his car, and drove off to deal with other matters. And just like that, Ina was left face to face with everything she definitely hadn't wanted to see. She hadn't planned on staying, or even seeing her sister. She just wanted to check out the house, decide if it was worth the trouble, and maybe sign over her share to Zina. Her younger sister had always felt deprived, forced to wear Ina's hand-me-downs as a child, never getting the nice markers. Eventually, they'd fallen out completely over some guy Zina had for some reason been insanely jealous of. Now Zina was married to that very same Vladik, and being around them, enduring her sister's sideways glances, was the last thing Ina wanted. Still, there was nothing to do. She was here now. The house itself turned out to be impressive. Ina hadn't expected that. Large, solid, in good condition, not some falling apart ruin. She decided to take a look around the yard. She was still toying with the idea of refusing the inheritance. She didn't like the way Zina looked at her or the way she and her husband whispered to each other. The yard was big, well kept, another surprise. "We want to go inside," Zina called out. "You coming or staying here?" Ina nodded and approached the porch. "Strange, isn't it? Why aren't Mom and Dad listed as first-line heirs?" she muttered as Zina's husband fiddled with the keys, trying to open the door. A lot of things here were strange, not least the notary's hurried departure, and the atmosphere itself. The house looked sturdy but felt oppressive. "You didn't know?" Zina's voice scraped her nerves like sandpaper. There was shrill joy in it, some kind of perverse anticipation. Ina shuddered and looked at her. "Didn't know what?" "Of course you wouldn't." Zina raised her chin and looked away. "How would you? You don't talk to us." "Sorry, I've been busy. Tight schedule." Ina cut her off, not wanting to get dragged into another family quarrel. "Sure, so tight you don't even have time to find yourself a husband," Zina sneered. Her jab failed to hit home. Ina was doing well enough, and envying her, let alone suspecting her of eyeing Zina's Vladik, was absurd. They both fell silent, the earlier question hanging in the air. Meanwhile, Vladik kept fumbling with the lock, taking forever. It was starting to get irritating. Finally, the lock clicked. The door swung open slowly, creaking, almost like the house sighed. They all froze on the porch, hesitant to step inside. The oppressive feeling was stronger than expected. Suddenly, Zina perked up, lips stretching into a predatory smile. She turned to Ina, gesturing toward the dark doorway. "After you. You're the eldest. You should go in first." Something about her tone set off alarm bells, some hidden catch. But Ina just wanted to get this over with. She still had the drive back ahead of her. Shrugging, she stepped over the threshold. The next instant, the door slammed shut behind her, and a colossal force smashed into her chest, slamming her against the wall, hurling her out of reality and into darkness. Chapter 2. Like a vortex. In the darkness, her eyes seemed to open, and suddenly she saw everything. Brilliant images flared before her inner sight. The earth, the underground, every blade of grass in crystal clarity. She saw Zenaida and Vladik outside on the porch, both pressed against the closed door, listening intently. "Think it's safe to go in? The house should be clean now," whispered Vladik. His voice thundered in her ears. Then abruptly, everything cut off, like a TV switched off. The vivid images shrank to a thread, then vanished. Black screen. Consciousness drifted away. She came to slowly. Her head felt like jelly sloshing back and forth, like after a heavy office party. Her sense of balance kept shifting. But there'd been no party. She knew that much. The last thing she remembered was coming to check out her grandmother's inheritance. So why did it feel like she'd taken a serious blow to the head? Inna squeezed her eyes shut, then cautiously groped around. She was clothed, good, but she was lying on the floor. In straw. What? She bolted upright, blinking against the dull pain in her temples until her vision cleared. Her bag lay nearby. She grabbed it, checked the contents. Everything seemed intact. She exhaled in relief. Now she could take stock of her surroundings. A flimsy shed, a door full of gaps, a tiny crooked window, the smell of rot, straw, and manure. Nothing like any structure she'd seen on Grandma's property, which meant she'd been taken somewhere else, while unconscious. A horrifying thought struck her. Kidnapped. The days evaporated instantly. If she'd been kidnapped, there was only one explanation: ransom, which meant there had to be a guard, a bearded guard for some reason. She didn't question why she imagined him bearded. Just bearded, that's all. Her skin prickled. Any moment now he'd come for her. She froze, listening. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. Strange sounds, rustling from all directions. Voices in the distance. Something squirmed in the straw beneath her. A mouse. She yelped silently and jumped aside, clutching her bag. Then it hit her. The kidnappers hadn't thought of everything. She still had her phone. A breakthrough. Hands shaking, Inna dug it out of her bag. Turned it on, no signal. Nothing worked. Of course. That explained why no one had bothered taking it away. She cursed, shoved it back in her bag, sat with her head in her hands. She couldn't just sit here waiting. Any second now, they'd come for her. She had to scout the area, maybe escape. She probably hadn't been taken far. She might even make it back to the car. And she still had the car keys. If she could just reach the car, she'd floor it all the way to Moscow without stopping. The thought gave her courage. She stood, brushing off the stinking straw, and crept toward the window. Then, half the front wall of the shed collapsed right before her eyes. She froze, breath caught. A giant paw. It crushed the debris underfoot and moved on. In the gaping hole left behind, she glimpsed a massive scaly tail ending in a spiked club, scraping the remaining wall as it passed. Then it vanished from view. For a few seconds, Inna stood motionless, wide-eyed, stunned. Then she darted to the opening and peeked out. A cobblestone street. Medieval buildings, stone and timber. For an instant, the thought flashed. Some kind of cosplay? A Witcher fan meet? But it vanished immediately, because down that very street tramped a huge winged lizard. And on the lizard's back sat a broad-shouldered man in gray, black-bearded, scanning the surroundings as he rode. The sight was so unreal she didn't even feel fear. She only noted his proud profile and thought, great, I knew there'd be a beard involved somehow. The man turned his head as if sensing something. She ducked behind the broken wall, peeking through a crack. He turned away, didn't see her. Relief. Then the dragon, right in the middle of the street, dropped an enormous pile of dung. The rider didn't react. The beast and man vanished around the corner. Inna might have stayed rooted there in disbelief, thinking she was dreaming, if not for what happened next. From the surrounding houses poured people in actual medieval garb. They rushed forward, chattering excitedly, collecting the dragon's droppings in baskets. "What luck!" someone shouted joyfully. "Enough fuel for a whole month." "So why did the Inquisitor come here?" another asked. That's when Inna realized this wasn't cosplay. She'd landed in another world. When the initial shock passed and she could think straight again, her situation became clearer. Two positives. She was alive and she understood the language. And that was it for the positives, because the next moment she heard what the locals were saying. A younger guy glanced around and whispered, "I didn't see her myself, but I heard a witch of great power has appeared in town." Two stout women and an older man instantly crowded closer. "A witch?" they gasped. "I thought the witch hunters caught them all." "Quiet," the man hissed. The woman flapped her hands apologetically and clamped her mouth shut. The youth looked around and continued, voice low. Appeared today, less than an hour ago. Our local master felt the surge of power. Bah, what would he know, toothless old coot, someone muttered. That's why they summoned a master from the capital. The Grand Inquisitor himself, Savary the Black, flew in on his dragon. Now that's urgent, eh? A collective gasp followed. Awe and fear mingled. Must have been in such a hurry he landed right on our street, murmured the man in wonder. No wonder we got so lucky. They say he's merciless to witches. Do you want me to continue translating the next part, past where they talk about the Inquisitor's reputation? Or summarize the next chapters for faster reading? But she couldn't help herself. Finally, she snapped out of it, pulled a 10-soled coin from the till, and slid it toward him. Your change. Keep it, he threw out with utmost disdain, and walked off to sit at a table already being fussed over by a waiter. Inna remained standing there, furious as 100 devils. She glanced at his gold coin, then pinched it between 2 fingers and demonstratively tossed it into the cash box. The man's eyes followed her gesture closely. The muscles in his jaw twitched. His fist clenched so tightly the fork bent in his hand. Her anger didn't care. She wanted to throw it all to hell right then and there. But who would let her? Guests began streaming in again. At first cautiously, stealing glances toward the grim inquisitor sitting at the central table. Then bolder, Inna deliberately avoided looking his way. Only when the tavern door slammed loudly did she flinch and raise her head. The table where the inquisitor had sat was empty. She could finally breathe easier. Though her mood remained vile, one thing cheered her. She'd made almost twice as much in tips in the past hour as in the entire morning. If it went on like this, a couple more days and she could already think about finding a mage, and then she'd finally go home. And the esteemed inquisitor could keep hunting his witch. Good luck to him, and 7 feet under the keel. She shook off her thoughts and noticed Kristoff watching her, and he was exactly the man she needed. She was planning to propose a deal to him. Inna waited until the boar-legged flood of patrons thinned and slid into a seat at his table. Tybalt was absent for some reason, which suited her just fine. She wanted to talk to her employer without witnesses. She plastered on a sweet smile and started cautiously. Uncle Kristoff. You're not going to the market today, he cut her off immediately, wiping sweat from his bald head. That's not what I came about. Not about that? His tone softened. All right. He puffed out his cheeks, rolled his eyes toward the ceiling, then leaned closer and whispered conspiratorially. You really spiced things up today, niece. I thought old Jayon was about to start breathing fire, just like his dragon. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about, Uncle, Inna said, lowering her voice and waggling her brows meaningfully. Privately, the innkeeper squinted, quickly swept his gaze around the hall, and nodded knowingly. Go upstairs, I'll come up. She didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her dinner, headed upstairs, and waited. Time crawled by tortuously slow. He arrived about an hour later, locked the door behind him, and sat across from her. Well, niece, he said, what did you call me for? She took a deep breath and began, I want you to help me find a mage who can send me back home. The innkeeper nodded, leaned back in his chair, and chuckled. Ha! Now that's a tall order. Inna expected negotiations would be difficult, but she had experience in that field too. Think about it yourself, she said. The inquisitors practically moved in here. Aha, he snorted, shamelessly picking at the leftovers of her dinner. He likes you? As a woman. Well, he's still a man, isn't he? What? Inna gasped, blushing furiously at how deftly the old rogue tried to throw her off balance. Spare me the nonsense, she snapped. And yet she couldn't help recalling how that arrogant skirt chaser had sniffed her and peered up her skirt, though what stuck with her more was something else entirely. Don't flatter yourself. My absence won't last long. He'd said it outright. He wasn't letting go. No, she wasn't about to lose focus now. He's provoking me, trying to get a rise out of me, she thought. Today I barely held back. What happens if I snap? You know what happens. And then what? They'll accuse you of hiding a witch. You'll be complicit. The innkeeper watched her silently. Clearly, he had no desire to end up in the Inquisition's dungeons either. Yet he was too calm, which suggested Kristoff also had some kind of ace up his sleeve. She pressed on. How long will the Inquisitor be gone? 3 days? A week? In that time, you must find a way to send me back to my world. Kristoff pursed his lips and then drawled in a thin voice. You'll work it off. Then we'll see. Are you insane? She exploded. 3 days, a month at most. A year, the old swindler shot back stubbornly. In the end, they settled on 6 months. He needed his profit, and finding a mage willing to smuggle her illegally would take time anyway. Inna was in shock. 6 months. That's going to ruin my credit payments. The mortgage, the car loan. Even her teeth ached at the thought. Her hair hurt. Her last argument was desperate. And what if this guy pushes me too far and my power breaks loose? What then? Don't worry about that, the innkeeper said calmly, pulling a small pin from his breast pocket, a bead glinting like an eye. Here, take it. It's from my granny. Pin it under your dress or on your stockings, and it'll calm you right down. Inna squinted. So that was it. His own grandmother had been a witch. That explained a lot. All right, she said, but I have conditions. If I live here and make you profit, Uncle, I want 30% of it. Kristoff nearly choked. They settled on 10. And clothes, jewelry, the works. I choose them. Deal? Deal, he grumbled and spat in his palm. Chapter 8. Mezdik Vartana. Such a jaw-breaking name for the seedy little seaside town where Magister Jayom Savare now had the misfortune of staying. The place buzzed with unhealthy excitement. Torches everywhere. Minions of Beskar, head of the local Inquisition branch, scurried about like madmen, pretending to be busy. It made the Magister sick. Jayom was a man of action. He hated paperwork and hated empty displays of zeal even more. Some envious fools called him Fortune's favorite. He always got results in record time. Others praised his analytical mind. He simply called it work, and he was good at it. But this time, something had gone wrong. He needed to get away, even briefly, to think things through, isolate what led to the mistake, and of course, report his findings to the Orders General. The last part made him wince. Jayom loathed reporting failures, and Reverend Beskar, annoyingly, was constantly underfoot. Gayom suspected the sudden chattiness of the old Inquisitor was deliberate. The toothless bastard wanted to trample his pride. Yet he did it so exaggeratedly polite and servile that there was nothing to accuse him of, and every reason to want to send him straight to hell. The Magister grimaced. Beskar kept mumbling, toothless gums smacking. Such a complicated case. Such a complicated case. Only Lord Cheverinish himself could unravel it. And poor old Beskar, what's he to do? Then came rambling about his merits, about how he was due for retirement any day now, and yet here he was, stuck with this. Beskar trailed him relentlessly, never missing a step, muttering all the while. Finally, Jayom snapped and turned to face him fully. Listen, Beskar, I need to leave at once. Yes, I understand. Do you? Jayom growled, catching the hint of mockery in the old man's tone. You need to make sure my dragon is properly fed. It can't eat this local slop. The toothless man glanced at him, a sly glint in his eye. He coughed delicately. Your dragon, forgive me, didn't it just provide your quarter with fuel for a month? Exactly, Jayom snapped. Now, I have to leave now, but in a couple of days I'll return, and the investigation will continue. This case is truly exceptional, to make sure there really was a witch, or whether you, hoping to attract the attention of the High Mission, had simply raised a false alarm. If Beskar had been smirking before, now he instantly deflated and finally fell silent, his beady eyes darting nervously. You don't need to see me off, Jian said. I'll find my way myself. And without looking back, he walked away from the tall building crowned with sharp spires toward the far end of the pier, where among the port warehouses his dragon was kept. He led the beast, restless after 2 days in its cramped pen, quickly mounted its back and soared into the night, one circle over the sea. He let the dragon stretch its wings, skim the water with its claws, then wheeled around and steered toward the mountains. The path ran right over the town. Jayon deliberately chose the very street where it had all begun. Conflicting thoughts crowded his mind, a complete mess, because he never missed. He'd felt it, unmistakably, found the very place where the surge of magic had erupted, and the woman, strange, as if newborn, carrying an elusive trace of power. He could have sworn, she is the witch. If not for one thing, she was a void. Not a hint of magic in her. Fine, he told himself. You were wrong. Annoying, yes, but let it go. Forget her and focus on the case. But forgetting was impossible. He kept circling back to her in his thoughts, analyzing, dissecting details and flaws. That usually helped. Yes, she wasn't young, not dazzlingly beautiful, yet the man in him had instantly attuned to her. He decided it was temporary. Sleep with her once, end of story. But when he saw her the next morning in the Boar's Trot Tavern in daylight, somehow she seemed different. And yet the impression remained the same as their first meeting. Every instinct screamed, witch! And again it all shattered on the fact she was an empty shell, no magic whatsoever. He stooped so low he even started following her. Her slip of the tongue about the monastery sounded laughable. But there was something strange about her, something elusive. And that defiance. The defiance of this woman chilled him, infuriated him, stirred up his basest instincts, and at the same time drew him like a magnet, distracting him from an investigation that, to make matters worse, was at a dead end. In short, the Magister was furious and burning with a sharp desire to get to the bottom of it. While Kristoff was upstairs handling matters with his niece, Tybalt sat at the master's table in the dim, half-empty hall, sipping sour white wine and stewing. The innkeeper had been gone barely an hour, yet the wait felt endless. Finally, Kristoff came downstairs, panting, wiping his sweaty bald head, and waddled to his table. He plopped down and nodded at his drinking buddy. Pour. Tybalt filled his mug with the cloudy white and asked casually, "What took so long?" Kristoff shot him a sidelong glance, waggled his brows, and said, "Fire, that girl. A hellion like you wouldn't believe. Squeezed 10% of the profits out of me." Tybalt blinked, stunned. "How much?" he rasped. "You heard me." "She's got you wrapped around her finger?" Tybalt exploded. "Mark my words, she'll bleed you dry." "Pour," Kristoff grunted. Tybalt poured, grumbling for a long while. After all, he wasn't getting a single % of the profits. "So what do you think?" Tybalt jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "No one will find out about it. The Inquisitor? He's hanging around anyway. Who knows why? You know how it is." Kristoff did know. The town of Skvartan was tiny. Nothing stayed secret here except skeletons in closets and horrifying mysteries that chilled the blood. The sudden appearance of his niece and the equally sudden interest of a high-ranking Inquisitor in the Boar's Trot Tavern had surely been noticed by many. But public opinion, well, with some work, it could be steered any way they wanted. Kristoff patted his buddy on the shoulder. "That's your job. We'll figure out exactly what to tell people. You'll spread it, explain, throw up some smoke. Puff up your cheeks and make it convincing. The important thing is to set the rumors we want going. And the Inquisitor? Let people think he just likes the meat stew. Or maybe he's got other personal interests." The innkeeper laughed lewdly, drained his mug, leaned back, and closed his eyes. "Mark my words, soon we'll be living the good life. I'll open a branch down at the port, a proper restaurant for the gentry." Tybalt listened, stewing in his own quiet resentment. First, because he used to be Kristoff's only confidant, and now he'd been pushed aside. And second, what kind of nonsense was this? Some random girl waltzes in and immediately gets 10% of the profits? He didn't like it one bit. He said nothing, but decided to keep a close eye on that witch himself. Night had fallen. The innkeeper had long since gone home. But Inna still sat on her bed, staring out the window. She thought perhaps she'd sold herself short. If her position were even a little stronger, she could have wrung more profit from Kristoff. Still, best not be greedy. After all, she'd negotiated for clothes and jewelry on top of her share. There, she'd make it up. But it would take time to get used to this new reality. 6 months. That was a long stretch. She sighed nervously and rested her forehead in her hand. If only she understood what that Inquisitor wanted from her. No sooner had she thought it than movement outside caught her eye. Inna looked and couldn't believe what she saw. Across the night sky, wings beating slowly and peacefully, a dragon glided past. She collapsed back onto the bed. Oh, may I be damned. He was here. But that meant the Inquisitor had flown away, and tomorrow she'd finally have a peaceful day. She hoped, in vain. Chapter 9. By morning, everything felt different. The day promised to be bright and sunny. That Inna's mood was light. Through the window stretched a clear sky, streaked only with rose-gold clouds, and no dragons, no Inquisitors. Today she planned to start working in earnest, to the fullest. That meant not just tossing coins into the till and logging income in the ledger, but thinking strategically. After all, she now had a share of the profits. The bigger the profit, the bigger her cut. Of course, there was the risk Christoph might try to outmaneuver her and turn her over to the Inquisition. But Ina Trom sensed the innkeeper wouldn't do that. She'd noticed that gleam in his eyes, the one real entrepreneurs had, which meant he'd bend over backward to expand the business. That was exactly what she intended to do. Study the local market, assess risks and opportunities, and then pitch him an offer he couldn't refuse. Then she'd renegotiate for a bigger share. With these thoughts, she jumped out of bed even before Christoph came knocking on her door. She washed quickly, tidied herself, dressed, and went down for breakfast. Halfway down the stairs, she remembered her protection charm. Quickly, she reached under her skirt to check the pin. Still there. Satisfied, she smoothed her dress and only then lifted her gaze. At the foot of the stairs stood Tybalt, openly staring at her. The moment was awkward, but Ina thought, to hell with it. She nodded curtly. Good morning. She passed by him. He didn't even budge. She had to squeeze past. Not that it occupied her thoughts for long. Christoph was already waiting at the table. He looked her over, grunted approvingly, and said, Sit down, niece. Breakfast is boiled eggs, bread, and milk. Looking at the spread, Ina couldn't help thinking about freshly brewed tea, or better yet, good coffee. And yes, she really needed at least one new dress. That, however, she decided to save for later. Instead, she asked something else. Does the tavern serve? Do you serve coffee anywhere here? What's that? The innkeeper arched his brows. Tybalt, who had silently come up behind her, pulled out a chair and sat down. It's a drink. Bitter, invigorating. Some people get hooked on it, can't imagine a day without it. If we serve it, we'll attract more regular customers. What the hell do we need that for? Tybalt snorted. We're packed to the rafters as it is. But Christoph pulled a serious face and shot his bouncer an annoyed look, then turned his head toward Ina, cocked it to one side and asked, You're talking about noble folk, aren't you? The question caught Ina off guard. In her world, coffee had long since stopped being a rarity. Everyone drank it. But here? Different story. She nodded? Yes, but not only them. Christoph studied her intently for a moment. She could almost see the numbers spinning in his eyes. Finally, he said, You'll go to the market with Tybalt after work. Ask around. And I need to buy a few things for myself, too, Ina added immediately. Seeing the innkeeper's face darken in anger, she quickly cut him off. I'm going back to work, and flitted away. You saw that? Christoph murmured, his gaze following his niece with open pride. The girl had instantly grasped the direction of his thoughts. Growth, expansion, a new level. He could already picture himself moving to the capital. Tybalt, however, did not share his enthusiasm. He was perfectly content with things as they were. Why go looking for trouble? He regarded the girl's initiative with open skepticism. He didn't say anything aloud, but decided he'd knock her down a peg or two when the chance came. Ina's workday began as usual, except now she also kept a personal notebook where she tracked which dishes were most popular and which barely sold at all. Based on that, she could later adjust the menu, something she mentioned to Tybalt when he nosily asked what she was writing. The man gave her a strange look and walked away. Later, he disappeared altogether. She didn't know whether Christoph had sent him on an errand or he'd gone off on his own. He returned 20 minutes later, rumpled and out of breath, as if he'd been running. Not that Ina cared about his comings and goings, that was the owner's problem. Her mood was good today. She smiled at customers, and clearly it paid off. In addition to tips, she collected 8 invitations to dinner and 3 marriage proposals. Business was brisk. As lunchtime approached, she suddenly caught herself glancing more and more often at the door. Waiting for the Inquisitor? Impossible, she told herself, spitting inwardly. He was nothing but trouble. Yet the moment she thought it, she noticed Tybalt cast a quick glance at the entrance. And right after that, the door opened, and men in gray uniforms began filing into the tavern one by one. At first, Ina froze. She glanced quickly at Christoph, who was speaking to Tybalt. The bouncer was nervously smoothing his hair and gesturing with his hands. The innkeeper waved him off and slowly stepped forward to greet the newcomers. That gave her at least some sense of protection, aside from the little pin with its bead hidden beneath her dress. Strange for a modern woman from a world of internet and globalization to put faith in some bead for protection. But she corrected herself. This wasn't her world, and the internet didn't exist here at all. The Inquisition did. There were 4 men. Their gray uniforms, yes, they were uniforms, were different from the Inquisitors. His fabric had been far finer, much higher quality. Still, these men carried themselves with a soldier's discipline and were armed with swords. 2 even carried halberds. They entered slowly, scanning the room. Either they were looking for someone, or it was their first time here. One of them turned toward her. The 4 of them headed straight for the counter. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Christoph met them halfway, saying something while wiping his bald head, but they barely listened. Their eyes were fixed on her. Ina took a deep breath, subtly touched the pin under her dress, and put on her brightest smile. When they reached the bar, she greeted them with a nod. "Would you like to place an order?" Smug grins spread across their faces. One of them, likely the leader, tilted his head and said, "We would, beauty." From there, it was easy enough. Service worked the same everywhere. Be quick, smile pleasantly, and keep things friendly, but not flirtatious. Ina took their order, wrote it down, and in the process learned they were city guards assigned to the mission security detail. "How long have you been working here?" one asked, eyeing her with interest. Ina stuck to her cover story. "A few days." "And where are you from?" The man leaned on the bar and leaned closer. "You look unusual." Here we go, she thought warily. "I'm from Targat, came to visit my uncle. Before that, I lived." At the monastery. The soldiers immediately perked up. "Oh, really?" Amazing how they all reacted the same way the moment they heard the word monastery. "Yeah, fake lead for you," Ina thought to herself. "Sorry, but I'm seeing Schultz," she said aloud, folding her hands demurely in front of her and lowering her gaze. As a result, the guards declared that Schultz was a lucky man, left her generous tips, sat down to eat, and eventually announced that they'd be coming to the Boar's Leg regularly now, because the portions were large and the food was decent. Finally, they left. Ina breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed she had pulled it off. Though a thought flickered. How am I going to shake off Schultz later? But then she decided problems should be solved as they arise. Christoph was beside himself with delight. He couldn't take his eyes off his niece. "Did you see how slick she was?" He whispered to Tybalt, wiping his bald head. "Soon the entire Spartan garrison will be eating here." Tybalt's mood, however, had soured. He himself had once served in the guard before defecting to Christoph's side. He still had old contacts, and he had already dropped hints, carefully phrased, to certain people who needed to know. That was Tybalt's specialty, speaking in half-truths, scaring the cunning girl enough to make her back off and quiet down. He was sure he could handle it, and maybe even earn himself a cut of the profits in Christoph's eyes. That had been the plan. But it all turned out differently. Still, after brooding for a while, Tybalt perked up. He was supposed to escort the girl to the market, and there he intended to observe her from another angle. Chapter 10. By evening, the little pocket on Ina's apron had filled with coins several times over, and she'd already emptied its contents into her personal stash under the mattress. While pouring out yet another handful, she thought, "This can't go on. I need to keep my money in a bank." But then the question arose, do they even have banks here? And if they do, what interest do they pay? When she asked Christoph, he looked at her in holy terror, swallowed strangely, and finally managed, "They do." Which was good news. It meant she wouldn't have to sleep on bags of small change. However, she wasn't going to any bank yet, not until she fully understood her status here. Today's plan was a trip to the market, and that meant another conversation with the innkeeper. When they struck their deal, they'd agreed that Uncle Christoph would provide lodging, food, and also pay for his beloved niece's clothes, jewelry, and other pleasant little things. When the old man heard this reminder, his face fell, then darkened, then turned slightly green. He glanced at her from under his brows, turned away, pulled out his purse, and fished inside with 2 fingers. He produced a 10-soled coin and handed it to her, looking at her hopefully, as if to say, "This will do, right?" She raised an eyebrow, making it clear that it was not enough. The innkeeper sighed heavily, rummaged in the purse again, and finally dumped 2 more coins into his palm. Another 10 sold and a gold piece. While Kristoff hesitated, wondering which he could part with less painfully, Inna deftly plucked both from his hand. He only managed a faint croak, following the coins with his eyes. "Thank you, dear uncle," Inna said sweetly, smiling, and turned to go. "Hey, hey!" he called after her. "Don't spend it all." Of course," she replied with a grin and headed for the door. Tybalt followed her like a shadow. Inna noticed that the bouncer had been unusually quiet since lunch and seemed to be sulking at her about something, which suited her just fine. She wasn't in the mood to chat either. At last, they reached the archway leading to the market. "We're here," Tybalt muttered. She glanced at him sideways, but didn't answer. His bad mood and mysterious grievances didn't interest her. If he wanted to sulk, let him sulk. So when he asked what they were going to buy, Inna replied, "I want to walk around and take a look." "As you wish," the man sniffed. "But hurry, lady. The market closes soon," which was reasonable. The market stalls stretched right along the pier, and across the street the ground floors of the houses were fitted out as little shops. She remembered some of the signs from last time, so she walked with purpose. The first shop she entered sold ready-made dresses. Tybalt snorted in outrage behind her. "It's more expensive here," he muttered. "You can wait outside if you like," she shrugged and stepped in. Fairly quickly, she haggled for a simple but elegant dress the color of seafoam, as well as some plain undergarments, surprisingly decent ones, no knee-length pantaloons or other barbarities, and stayed within budget. Half the money Kristoff had given her was gone. She then bought a new hairbrush and ribbon from the stalls, picking up basic feminine necessities. Afterward, she decided to look for coffee. She scanned the rows and headed for the area where dried fruits, nuts, and exotic spices were sold. There, luck wasn't on her side. One swarthy middle-aged merchant told her he did have coffee, but would bring it tomorrow. Tea proved harder to find, but someone else promised to source something suitable. She made arrangements to come back tomorrow, and as a treat, bought some nuts and candied fruits. By now she had bought everything she needed, but felt oddly unsatisfied. Tybalt hovered behind her like a silent statue, a mute reproach. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky over the sea crimson and gold. A shimmering golden path glinted on the water, and the high mission walls gleamed dark red in the light. Beautiful. Hard to believe that building was the main torture chamber of the proud city of Spartan. She lingered a moment too long. The market would soon close, but she didn't want to leave. Without knowing why, Inna wandered toward the stall where she had bought stockings last time. A restless feeling tugged at her, the urge to turn around, to scan the crowd, searching for a familiar tall figure. Finally, she forced herself to stop thinking about someone she shouldn't be thinking about. She reached the vendor, bought another pair of thinner stockings, and paid. That should have been it. Time to go. And then, shouting behind her, "Look, look, coming in from the sea!" She didn't yet understand what was happening, but like everyone else, she ran to the railing. In the crimson sunset sky, massive black wings flashed overhead. A dragon made a loop over the sea and descended toward the port. The world suddenly burst with new colors, and a smile tugged at her lips. She stood there only a moment before hearing a low, venomous whisper right beside her. "Well, look who's back." The butcher. Tybalt. She had forgotten about him. She spun sharply to face her escort. His face was twisted, teeth bared in old hatred. It was strange. She suddenly thought there might be some personal history here, even though, as far as she knew, there shouldn't be any connection. But what did she really know of Tybalt's past? Until now, she hadn't paid much attention to this brooding type, but now she decided to watch him more closely. After all, she didn't think the Inquisitor was all that evil. Sure, Guillaume Savary was an unbearable cad and shameless womanizer. No question about that. But she didn't sense rot in him. And you could tell a lot about a man from the way he tipped, too. She had even caught herself feeling bored when he wasn't around. That was an unsettling thought. So when Tybalt hissed, "Time to go, unless you want to run into the Inquisitor again," she turned at once and headed for the market exit, cheeks burning the whole way. They reached the boar's leg surprisingly quickly, and Inna wasn't even out of breath. As for Guillaume Savare, he could sum up his mood over the past day in one word: dissatisfied. Dissatisfied with everything. The first investigation had gone disastrously. He'd had to blush and bite his lip like a rookie when reporting results to the orders general. The general listened calmly without interrupting, then stepped to the window. Guillaume deeply respected this solid gray-haired man and valued his opinion. Finally, the general turned and spoke a single sentence. "I'm concerned about the state of the Skvarton mission." Guillaume himself had been uneasy about the strange machinations Beskar was stirring up there. He couldn't say exactly why. There wasn't enough evidence, but replied simply, "I'll handle it." The general gave him a searching look and nodded. "Go." Guillaume flew out that very day. He could have delayed. A few days, even weeks, would not have mattered to the investigation. But something was driving him, some undercurrent of anxiety. He would sooner bite his own tongue off than admit it, but that tension was tied to a woman. All the way back he hurried. But the moment he landed in Skvarton's port, he inexplicably calmed. He froze there, and the sense of harbor refused into his lungs and glanced toward the town. The sun had almost set. The first lights were beginning to appear in the houses. Somewhere out there was a woman who, strangely enough, pulled him in and occupied his thoughts. Tomorrow, he thought. Right now he had plenty to do. He left the dragon at the port and headed toward the high walls of the mission. Chapter 11. They had not been expecting him at the mission so soon. Reverend Beskar was openly stunned, mumbling incoherently about the late hour. Guillaume gave him a stern look. The old man immediately fell silent. Everyone knew the Inquisition didn't sleep, not day or night. For a moment, Beskar's eyes showed confusion, but he quickly adjusted and changed his tune. "Your quarters will be prepared immediately. We'll bring you the best dinner, the finest wine." "I won't be resting." Guillaume cut him off brusquely as they walked. "I intend to review the crystal recording in detail at once. And you, Reverend, will stay nearby to clarify any questionable points. Any spontaneous surge of magic or illegal use of it was always recorded on crystals. During investigations, these crystals were kept on site, with their contents transmitted directly to the High Mission. After a case was closed, the crystals were archived. The information Beskar had provided earlier had been too chaotic, too sloppy. That was why Guillaume had flown here in such haste. Now the magistrate felt only frustration. He should have examined the recordings immediately rather than relying on instinct and experience. He'd paid for that mistake with a humiliating reprimand. Still, it wasn't too late. There had been no new surges of power reported since, so he could still piece things together. "None. Your Grace," Beskar stammered in response to a question Guillaume had apparently asked aloud. The old priest immediately plastered on a nervous, obsequious smile. Cautiousness radiated from him now. They reached the crystal vault. Beskar hurried ahead to open the door. Inside, a trainee was sitting idly. The Reverend barked at him harshly. The scrawny boy bolted. What was a trainee even doing here at this hour? Guillaume thought irritably, shooting Beskar a sidelong glance. But first things first, the crystal, he ordered, stepping toward the table. With exaggerated grunts and groans as though dragging some terrible weight, Beskar placed several crystals before him. Guillaume frowned. "What's this? Each investigation is recorded on a single crystal. Why are there 5? Forgive me, Your Grace," Beskar stuttered. "My hands shake. My sight is poor. Sometimes I confuse." "You confuse which recording is which." Guillaume cut him off sharply. The old man hunched his shoulders and darted a nervous glance at him. A chill ran down Guillaume's spine, followed at once by anger. "Sit where I can see you," he growled. Then he began reviewing the crystals. No wonder the report had been so jumbled. 5 damaged crystals, full of fragmentary and contradictory information. Large portions were unreadable. Other sections outright contradicted each other. When Guillaume finished the review, he set them aside. "There are 5 versions here," he said coldly. "Which one were you planning to send to the archives of the High Mission?" Beskar babbled excuses, claiming he'd tried his best, that the damage was from overwork, trembling hands, failing eyesight. Guillaume stared at him, unsure whether to believe him or not. It could be true, or it could be deliberate. The conclusion presented itself. Someone here was intentionally hiding the truth. Likely they had been correcting recordings and sending altered versions to the archives for quite some time. But why? What were they concealing? He gave the Reverend a long, hard look, then jerked his head toward the door. That's enough. Leave me? Beskar muttered protests, but finally shuffled out. Giam sat, arms folded on the table, staring into space, then began reviewing the discs again. The surge of magic had definitely occurred. He'd felt it himself. But a surge of such magnitude always left traces. Hurricanes, scorched land, seas churned into chaos, villages crawling with the walking dead. Giam Savari had seen it all in his years with the Inquisition. But here, no destruction, no casualties. He stayed in the laboratory for hours, puzzling over the mystery, and finally decided to set it aside until morning. That same morning, Inna woke at dawn, startled awake by dreams she couldn't even bring herself to recall. Her cheeks were still burning with embarrassment. She washed carefully, got herself ready with unusual thoroughness, quickly ironed the apron she had washed the night before, and spent a long while studying her reflection in the cloudy, battered mirror Christoph had generously provided. She even tried a new hairstyle, weaving a ribbon into her hair. Then she put on new underwear and the dress she had bought yesterday at the market. The dress was made of inexpensive fabric and simply cut, but it fit her figure well. And the sea green color wonderfully set off her eyes. They were gray-green, but now seemed darker and deeper, almost with a bluish tint. It looked quite nice. She fastened the brooch to the dress. Inside the skirt there was a special hidden pocket sewn in for it. Very convenient. After giving herself one last look, she left the little room and started down the stairs. Yesterday, when the Inquisitor's black dragon landed in the port of Skvartan, Tybald's first thought had been to get away as quickly as possible and avoid running into Savare. The capital Inquisitor probably didn't even remember him, but it was precisely because of Savare's interference that Tybald had lost his cushy post at the mission. He had worked as a warden at the prison, and as luck would have it, a prisoner accused of witchcraft had escaped. Savare had headed the commission from the capital at that time, and on his orders everyone involved in guarding the prisoners was dismissed. As a result, Tybald lost his easy job and the decent side income he used to get from prisoners behind bars, and came to hate the capital Inquisitor with every fiber of his being. But he kept that hatred bottled up. There had been no chance to settle the score. He'd had to swallow it. Later, Tybald found shelter with his godfather Christoph at the tavern, and things seemed to be looking up. All of that had settled down, until now, when his well-being was again under threat. Two events had upended Tybald's life at once. The sly girl who had appeared out of nowhere and instantly wrapped Christoph around her little finger, and the reappearance of Giam Savari in town. The former prison warden couldn't even decide which of them enraged him more. Probably the girl, since the Inquisitor was far away and unreachable, while she was there every day, irritating him more and more with each passing moment. To begin with, Christoph now hung on her every word. All she had to do was whisper something, and suddenly she had money, freedom, a cut of the profits. Who knew what else she might demand? The girl's appetite, God save them, was boundless. He had gone with her to the market and seen her shamelessly choosing the best of everything, never thinking she should show a bit of modesty or save money. Of course, it wasn't her who earned it. By the time Tybald made it from the market back to the tavern, he had cooled off a bit and drawn some conclusions. Since the Inquisitor had come here in a hurry, came back, which meant he had business here. The fact that during his previous visit, Savare had spent his time hanging around the Boar's Leg Tavern instead of hunting witches was strange enough by itself. And now that the Inquisitor seemed interested in the sly girl, doubly strange. Hard not to notice that. Putting two and two together, Tybald concluded that the Inquisitor hadn't flown here in a rush for nothing. He was here to catch the witch, and most likely they should expect guests tonight. The thought that this girl might be arrested and dragged off to the mission was pure balm to his tormented soul. Everything would go back to the way it was, and Christoph would once again pay attention only to him. But nothing of the sort happened, even though Tybald stayed alert the whole night, waiting not to miss the moment. Half the night he stood watch. Then he couldn't take it anymore and ran to the mission to ask around among his old acquaintances in the guard. Yet nobody knew anything. They said the magister had locked himself up in the records room and hadn't come out since. Damn, Tybalt muttered to himself. What business could he possibly have in the records room? Turned out he had miscalculated. It was extremely annoying that he couldn't get rid of the girl as easily and quickly as he had hoped. Upset, he went home and collapsed into bed. But in the morning, a rather interesting thought occurred to him. He could still get what he wanted, only by a different route, and this one would be even more certain. If he wanted to be rid of this unwanted competitor, he would have to marry her. That way, he'd secure a share of the profits and gain leverage over Kristoff himself. And the hussy should count herself lucky. She'd be made into an honorable woman, but she'd need to be kept on a tight leash. Tybalt was determined to cure her of her insolence, her habit of making eyes at customers, and her careless spending of his money. He wasn't Kristoff or Schultz. With him, you sit where you're told and get off where you're told. Everything seemed to be working out fine. All that remained was to put the plan into action. He could start courting the brazen, headstrong girl, of course, but why bother? Tybalt had no intention of wasting time. A woman should immediately feel the firm hand of a man. He planned to corner her somewhere secluded and drag her into bed. After that, she'd have no choice but to marry him. It was with this goal in mind that he now waited for her on the staircase. The first flight she descended almost in a run, lightly leaping down the high steps, in a hurry. She was in high spirits. She had nearly cleared the landing when a strange premonition came over her out of nowhere. Inna stopped on the mid-landing, leaned over the railing, and looked down. A shadow stirred in the stairwell between flights, an unpleasant feeling like seeing a rat. Why? Carefully, she pressed herself back against the wall and froze, listening. Silence below, but she hadn't imagined it. Someone was there. Damn, it was an unpleasant sensation. Whoever was hiding down there was clearly waiting for something too. Several long seconds passed like that, and suddenly, footsteps. Quiet ones. Someone was sneaking upward. A step creaked. For an instant she felt fear, and immediately afterward that now familiar shift of altered reality came over her. The world shimmered before her eyes. Her senses sharpened until it seemed she could feel everything around her. Those footsteps were close now, labored breathing. The scent. Tybalt. The fear vanished in an instant. Why on earth was the bouncer lurking on the stairs? She stepped out of her hiding spot and calmly continued down, step by step, 2, 3, until she finally saw him coming up toward her. He looked strange. A smirk flickered across her lips but quickly vanished. He even recoiled and his face changed when she asked, "What's the matter, Tybalt? Lose something?" "No, step aside." He mumbled something incoherent and tried to block her path. He was at the bottom of the flight, while Inna was descending quickly and wasn't about to slow down. It reminded her of a scene from her world, like an airplane going into a ramming maneuver. Another moment, and she'd sweep him away like a broom sweeps a straw. At the last moment, the man dodged to the side and pressed against the railing as she passed him, her skirt brushing against him. She hurried down and into the common room, not caring what he muttered after her through clenched teeth. Tybalt couldn't understand what had just happened. Everything had been going his way. The girl was practically in his grasp. And suddenly, something strange. Terror gripped him, so strong that he'd flinched away from her, and then she walked right past, her skirt slapping him in the face. She was gone, yet Tybalt still stood there on the stairs, trying to regain his senses. Finally, he shook his head and looked around. He was still on the stairs. What was that fog in his mind? What had just happened to him? He looked around again and noticed mold stains on the ceiling above. Damn, that explained it. He just breathed in some of that stuff. That's why he hallucinated. The disappointment was bitter. Still, the man had no intention of giving up. If not this time, then next time. Slowly, he went down and shuffled into the hall. The girl sat at a table with Kristoff, eating defiantly and talking quickly, while Kristoff sat open-mouthed, hanging on her every word. Tybalt exhaled slowly, swallowing his irritation, and walked toward the table. Chapter 12. Inna glanced at the local bouncer whom Uncle Kristoff had assigned to guard her, and thought that really, no one knew what the shady fellow's real motives or tasks were. Best to keep her ears open and lock her door well, just in case. She had no idea what Tebold was doing on the stairs, or why he had been sneaking around so mysteriously, she thought, and smiled at him with her most innocent expression. His reaction was odd. First he twitched, his gaze went glassy, and his mouth dropped open. Then he sidled over to the table and stared at her sideways, like a squint-eyed hawk. It was obvious the man's brain was creaking from the strain of thinking too hard. She propped her chin in her hand, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "Enjoy your meal." Then immediately turned to Christoph. "Well, Uncle, if we finish talking, I'll get back to work." And here's what they had just been talking about. Yesterday, there had been no chance, but today she finally shared with the innkeeper the results of her observations. Which dishes were ordered most often, which were never ordered at all. As a result, the kitchen always had leftovers. Should they be thrown away or fed to pigs? And by the way, did they keep pigs? When she learned they didn't, she gave Christoph a pleading look, and he was already mentally calculating the losses caused by his own inefficiency. Of course, pigs would need tending, but that was practically free labor. And if you later used the meat for food and sold off various byproducts, you'd have a virtually zero waste operation. Inna saw the old rogue's mental calculator whirring and thought it was the perfect time to offer another innovation from Earth. Obviously, she couldn't introduce radical ideas too quickly, but little by little, disguised as clever novelties, they'd go over just fine. Start small. Set out salted croutons on every table, free of charge. The first thing Christoph asked, "Why? They'll fill up and won't order anything else. No freebies, only for paying customers. Salted croutons make people thirsty. Put the beer where they can see it. Croutons are free, but the beer." The cultural shock was plain on the innkeeper's face. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and squinted slyly. "You're cunning, girl." Inna modestly blushed and thought, a couple more ideas like this, and then I can start negotiating for a bigger share of the profits. And one more thing, based on experience, negotiations must end at the right time. Like now, when the client is already lost in rosy prospects. Let him imagine the rest himself. Quite pleased with herself, Inna went back to work, though for some reason she couldn't sit still behind the bar today. Something inside her was buzzing with anticipation. She suddenly realized she kept glancing at the door, waiting to see whether that outrageously straight and powerful figure in gray robes would appear. And honestly, the moment she caught herself thinking of him again, she grew furious at herself, seized the chance, and ran upstairs to her room. True, on her way back down, she nearly bumped into the local bouncer, Tybalt again. She couldn't help but think how suspiciously often that guy crossed her path. Still, now she had tucked away in her secret pocket a little pouch of treats bought at the market the day before. She needed something to distract herself and cheer up her mood, ruined by her own foolishness. Back in her old world, she always kept a stash at work for moments like these. A cup of good, aromatic coffee would have been even better, but this would do. Candied fruits and nuts, she poured them onto a small plate and nibbled piece by piece. The sweetness lifted her mood and made work flow easier. By noon, the tavern filled with soldiers again, the same 4 who had come yesterday, and 2 new ones. The hall grew especially noisy, filled with laughter. She had just jotted down another order in the ledger, smiled at a soldier who left her a good tip, and absent-mindedly reached for her plate of treats, biting into a candied peach slice, when the tavern door opened. And there, standing on the threshold, staring straight at her, was the Inquisitor. Magister Savari's day had begun far less cheerfully than he would have liked. He'd risen before dawn, hardly having slept. Instead of breakfast, he drank a glass of milk and ate a crust of bread, then set about questioning Reverend Beskar. But the informal interrogation yielded nothing. The old man squirmed like a snake on a griddle, spinning so many different versions and details that finding the truth in the flood seemed impossible. "All right," Guillaume finally cut him off. "I need copies of the working crystals from other cases handled in your mission." "But there aren't any, Your Grace." "Where are they?" Guillaume's patience was wearing thin. He was already irritable, and at that moment he caught some kind of signal, an irresistible pull toward her. Guillaume was ready to leap up and rush off to find the woman, But instead, the magister forced himself to continue the interrogation. Resisting the strange attraction proved difficult, which only worsened his mood. And when he heard Beskar's next answer, he exploded. "They broke, your grace." The Reverend spread his hands. "How could they break?" Savary asked softly, leaning forward. The old man's eyes darted nervously. "Oh," he babbled. "When I was recording, there was a surge. I hurried, tried 5 discs. Can't see well, your grace. My hands tremble. I dropped the cabinet and they all shattered. But the originals are kept in the archive of the High Mission anyway. Do you want to see the shards?" Jiam stared at him, fighting the sharp urge to strangle the sly elder. "Originals in the High Mission. And which originals?" "The carefully scrubbed ones." So Beskar had moved fast to cover his tracks. Interesting. When did he do it? In advance or just last night? Jam suspected the entire working archive of the Skvartan mission might have been destroyed that very night during the few hours he slept. By rights, he should clap the Reverend in irons and throw him in the dungeon. Then the man would sing a very different tune. But to do that, he needed a warrant. And for a warrant, irrefutable evidence. All Jiam had so far were guesses, and those fragmented bits of data left on the damaged crystals. He didn't voice his thoughts aloud. He only said, "I hope the crystals I worked on yesterday are intact." Beskar bent double. If anything happened to those. The Reverend stiffened, and Jiam paused, rose from the table, and walked past him to the window, staring out at the port. From there, he could clearly see the part of the harbor where his dragon lounged among the buildings. A thought flickered in his mind, but didn't quite form. He turned to the wheezing, fawning Beskar and continued. "If even one more breaks or disappears, instead of retirement, you'll go straight to a tribunal." "Your grace, for what? I've warned you." Jiam gave him a meaningful look and left the office, closing the door behind him. A moment of ringing silence. The old man glared daggers at him, then hastily changed his expression and began to mutter obsequiously. "Your Grace Magister Savary, what about lunch? You haven't eaten since morning. At least taste what our cook prepared." "Not hungry," Jean muttered without looking back, and stepped out of the mission building toward the port to check on his dragon. This time, he brought proper feed, concentrated, rich in magic, and tasty. While feeding the black beast, that Jiam thought bitterly how poorly he had monitored the affairs of the Skvarta mission in the past. He had visited here no more than twice in all this time, and even this trip had been accidental. It just happened that way. Yet now it seemed the threads stretched far, all the way to